Thank you so much to Mingle for giving me this opportunity to share with you what we're trying to start with the Center for Imagination at Woodstock School. We see it as a catalyst for change in education. So I've called this, How Can We Help Young People Find Their Place in the World? Because after 6 years as Woodstock's academic dean, in charge of the curriculum and learning and teaching, I felt that this is what we were failing to do. It's one thing to help young people achieve high scores in an exam, even get into a good college, even get into a good career, but if they have not found their place in the world, they have no sense of belonging. And this question became more pressing to me when I came across the Japanese concept of ikigai. This is now painted outside the door of the Center for Imagination. The Japanese idea of ikigai is a reason for being, and the concept is that if we can find what we love, what the world needs, what we're good at, and what we can be paid for, then we will have found our reason for being. And this is what I want to help young people find through our Center for Imagination. So I took a sabbatical a year ago to earn a degree in Ecological Design Thinking, and there was a reason I did that. Pioneering systems thinker Donella Meadows used the illustration of a Slinky, a toy that I'm sure we've all played with when we were younger, to explain how important it is to think in systems rather than in isolated ideas. So she would hold up a Slinky, so imagine that I have one, and then she would remove her hand. And of course, what would happen is that the Slinky would bounce, right? She would ask the crowd, what made the Slinky bounce? And everybody would say, you removed your hand, right? Then she would pick up something like a box or a book and remove her hand. And of course, nothing happened, right? And the idea was that it's the structure, it's the architecture of the Slinky itself in combination with outside forces that makes it behave the way that it does. I became deeply convinced that it's the entire structure of the education system, along with outside forces that are complex, that make it behave the way that it does. And if we are really to bring change, it needs to be deep, systemic change. And not only that, but our young people need to learn how to inhabit these complex global systems that we do, and learn how to think about them. So I began to believe that we need to reimagine understanding for complexity, for interdependence, and for harmony in these large global systems that we inhabit. So when I came back from my sabbatical and we started up the Center for Imagination 1 year ago, we developed a golden circle based on the work of Simon Sinek, so the why, the how, and the what. You might have seen some of his TED Talks. So our why does the Center for Imagination exist? Because we need to empower young people to successfully navigate the global systemic challenges that are ahead of us. How do we do that? By showing young people the complexity of the world they inhabit and encouraging them at every turn to take responsibility for shaping their own futures. So what do? We imagine new paths of learning, we inspire new paths of action, and we incubate new initiatives within the school. So I'm going to give you just 3 quick examples of what that might look like. So if we're working on understanding interdependence, we might focus on a particular kind of experiential learning. A year ago, I took a group of 20 students for a week to Jaipur to look at block printing. They didn't know it, but the entire point of the week was for them to learn about interdependence. And as we went through the week, and they tried the work of a block carver, they tried the work of a printer, they tried the work of dyeing, they met with organic cotton farmers, they began to realize that every piece of that economic system depends on every other piece. And it became an awareness that they arrived at, rather than me telling them, look, this system is interdependent and you must understand that. They lived it, and so they became aware of it. About a month ago, I took a similar trip with about 20 students to Agra, where we looked at shoe factories. And students were shocked to discover that a humble shoemaker in Agra was directly impacted by Brexit. It directly impacted the demand for shoes exported to England. And that, again, arriving at a lived experience of interdependence is really different than somebody telling you about it. Second, if we're trying to understand complexity, we might use a tool called system mapping. I asked a year ago some students to imagine our school as a system and then visually represent that in whatever way seemed most fitting. So one girl, we have a problem with monkeys at the school. We're up in the mountains. One girl decided to represent the school as a monkey. She had the outsider's view and the insider's view. And if you were to look very carefully at her diagram, you would see that every system of the monkey, every biological system, is mapped onto a system at the school. So this is actually an incredibly complex vision of what a school is and does. It involved her learning biology, art, environmental science, interviewing people, learning about fieldwork and research, and then pulling all of that together into one diagram. And represented, for me, a great way of understanding complexity and how to make sense of complexity. Another girl took a concept from environmental science, the concept of ecological succession in forests, that after a fire, a forest slowly rebuilds. Our school symbol of a tree had just had to be cut down. It had died. And on the trunk of the tree, she found ferns growing, new ferns. So she took this idea that in a school, you have a series of communities. You have community succession in the same way that a forest has ecological succession. So she looked at the school over time, and again, ended up with a very complex understanding of what a school is and does. And finally, a third example. If we are to find harmony in the world, I believe it's vital to put in front of young people powerful examples and role models that begin to shape their aspirations differently and more deeply. 2 weeks ago, we were very privileged to welcome peace activist Satish Kumar, who shared with us the story of his walk from 1962 to 1964. He walked, this was a poster that a student made to advertise his talk, which is another way that students can interact with role models that you might put in front of them. He walked from Gujarat to Moscow, to Paris, to London, took a ship and landed in New York, and then walked to Washington, D.C. He met every world leader along the way, delivering a packet of tea and suggesting his entire walk was against nuclear armament. And his suggestion was that before a world leader considered pushing the nuclear button, they ought to stop and have a fresh cup of tea and consider the consequences of their actions. He took a vow of poverty for that entire 2.5-year walk. He met Martin Luther King along the way when he arrived in DC. And his talk was incredibly inspiring for our children. He then spent about an hour answering their questions. He was mobbed by students afterwards with 2 hours more of questions. And it proved a very powerful example of what one person's role modeling can do for young people's aspirations. So we've taken as our symbol the fern. It's a very humble plant that grows all over where we are in Mussoorie. And it unfurls when it grows, following the mathematical Fibonacci sequence that's important for math and science and art. And for us, it represents the unleashing of potential, the unfurling of potential, which is what we see in our young people and in the Center for Imagination. And so what I'd like to do today is invite you to imagine with us how we could transform the system of education so that young people can better find their place in the world. Thank you.